I'd like to take you on a little journey and imagine for a moment that all your operational and day-to-day issues are sorted, and this is about how we prepare for tomorrow's children. And that's one of the underlying edicts of our group is Mobo Jarjum, tomorrow's children. How do we get all the work that we've done into the space where they're going to be talking about it? Into their campfire, if you like, around their kitchen table. And I want you to think of the news feeds or information feeds you had when you were growing up. And if I take myself back to my youth, 60s and 70s, the information feeds that little boy got was from my mum in the kitchen, my dad around the yard, the school environment, and then I played soccer, full. And we had a box in the little black and white thing in the corner of the room, and that brought in the news of the day. And they were our information feeds. But I guess today, I just want us to look, and some of us have been in this journey for 30 years or more, we're having a giggle about it before. What are we going to be doing in 30 years' time? This is not about what we think of iPads or technology. This is about how we get our message into those kids. That little girl didn't sign up for a language lesson, and she mightn't even speak English, but she's getting a language lesson right where she is. Now, for me, I see missed opportunity every time I see a kid on their pad, because I could be in there teaching them you're going to be a language, but I'm not at this point. Why? They're playing Minecraft, or they're texting their mates, or they're doing some other activity, and I'm being pushed out of it. I've got the community base, we can get to them in their households, if we can get through their parents, I can get to them through the schools, but God knows that's a fight and a half. If I can get onto that thing that they're logged onto the moment they wake up, and then when they're waiting for mum to take them to school or dad to take them to school, they're on it. When they're in the back seat of the car, they're on it. At a lot of schools, they're on it at lunchtime. And while they're waiting for the bus to take them home, when they're on it, that thing spends more time with kids than a lot of us parents will ever get to do. And we have to start to realise that if we don't be part of that discussion, we're turning our backs on the thing that is communicating with the next generation. And a lot of us really struggle with it because we're not happy with it. We don't like Facebook, we don't like those things, but it's not about us. We're Mobo Jarjum, it's tomorrow's children. Some of the stats, 90% of Australians are on the internet. Australians watch double the amount of internet than they do TV. Now, we watch a heck of a lot of TV as well, but we watch more internet on our screens than we do TV, twice the amount. And 2/3 of Australians spend 100 minutes on social media every day. 2/3, 100 minutes every day. So for me, we have a huge wealth of language material that we want to get out to the masses. The city of the Gold Coast, city of Logan, and the Scenic Rim, almost 1 million people that come within our remit just for our language, and we work with languages all around the place. How do I get into those 400 schools? How do I get to those hundreds of thousands of kids and teach them language? I have to be in their campfire. I have to be in that thing that's up there. I don't have the solution for it. We're working on those, but it's something, the more we look into it, the more we realise the march has gone in a lot of ways. These kids were already into it, and we're fumbling around at the edges going, oh, we don't think we really agree with it. And so my message here today is we have to be, or that generation will disappear without us having our chance to pump our languages into them. Any questions?
Thanks for reminding us about the special place of technology in the life of the next generation. I wanted to just convey an experience I had talking to people in California about this who wanted to try to revive the language of Thailand that they spoke, called Yu Mien. And they said, in order to make their language attractive to those children, it needs to be embedded in technology. And so they wanted to make a dictionary. And then they said, please come and help us make a dictionary. And I just asked them, what language did you use with your children at home this morning? And they blushed and looked down. And we talked a bit about that. And we came to realise that they were kind of putting off the day when they make that more difficult transition themselves to somehow own their language or do something risky, and saying, what we know how to do is go after funding to build an app to put it. It's like 3 steps before that tough decision day to day. And I just wonder what you think about somehow doing both those at the same time.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. And in summary, you know, it starts in the home, I think, is the point of what you're saying when you're trying to revitalise a language. And this isn't something we dreamt up. In 2013, our board of the corporation made the decision to take our written dictionary, a dictionary written in 1913 by a local Aboriginal man, and make it online. Because we had printed copies, and early on when I was at the museum, I thought we'd give a copy to every family on the Gold Coast and in our region. I give them 2 copies because I always lose it. And of course, you can't do that. It costs too much. But I thought, if I can make this accessible online, it also stops people ringing me up and going, Rory, I'm about to give a speech. What's that word for borrowby? And it's like, you've got a dictionary. Yes, someone stole it at work. So we put it on their phones. And it's free because kids always have phones and they never have credit, do they? And that really took off. And what I had a really emotional speech from a senior member of a Bedtime community the other day, and he was sitting with his grandchild with the app going through language words and going, oh, this man used to use this word, and they were learning that way. And his daughter, the mother of the child, was crying because she said, we didn't have that when I was a kid. I had nowhere to go to get language. People are very caught up in what they're doing. We don't have an elder in every school. I don't have an elder who can go everywhere and teach the kids. And a lot of the parents don't have the confidence to do it because they just don't. And more importantly, I've got this sneaky program where I want you to learn 10 Yugambeh words without you knowing it. Because that way, if everyone knows words, from the mayor of the Gold Coast, who now greets people with Jingeri, and Borrowby, which is the mascot for the Commonwealth Games, hey, people say, I don't know any language words. Oh, yes, you do. You've just used 3. And where are we? We're at Kurrawa. Oh, that's 4. And at Carrara, that's 5. If I can get it in by sneaky, as my 10-year-old boy would say, people start to realise I do know language and it's not so threatening to them. But I agree with you 100%. In the ideal world, that's what we do. But once that kid disappears and gets on the bus, I want to be in their face as well, as their best friend, and here's another language word you can use. Any other questions?
Thank you. My name is Makayla Dad. I'm a Cabrogal woman from the Georges River in Sydney. I'd really like everyone in the room to think about the opportunities that we have right now and into the future. I don't think we'll be inside doing this stuff. I think all our technology will be outside, and it already is in communities I've been living in, like Jabiru, working with drones, working with augmented and mixed realities. So I think there's a great opportunity for kids to be walking through country and these things just coming in through bone conducting audio, like in this device, we can do that already. Talking to the country can talk to the kids now. The kids don't have to talk and program into the iPad.
Yeah, thank you. And we've just done a project with national parks where you walk up in the middle of the bush, beautiful bush scene, miles from anyone, you hold your phone up to a QR code and you can hear a song that was last sung in our country in the 1800s calling men and women to a corroboree. And you're in the bush and you hear this young baritone belting out their song, and it's beautiful. And that's the kind of things I think we need to be thinking outside of the traditional to get to where people are. You know, take your sausage stand to where the group is and that way you'll sell more sausages. Really bad analogy. Anyway.
In 2012, we started a Google Yumadira course in Hofau Primary School. And it was designed to help create an immersion learning environment in Google Yumadira. Okay, this approach we developed is it's been developed with the best speakers of the language, linguists, and it's effective. In 2015, Palmer Language Centre was established to help spread this revitalisation work across Cape York Peninsula. Cape York Peninsula it's a hotspot of language diversity in the world. There are 55 macro languages and 155 language varieties we're working with. The problem is we've got a window of about 5 years before we don't have speakers anymore. We have really limited resources and a really limited time. After that 5 years is up, it becomes reclamation work. So we have had to change the way we look at things. So what we're doing, we're developing projects to get the accelerated returns we want. We develop projects that proliferate. Every project we do gives birth to new projects. Yeah, that's what it does. So we're developing a number of different platforms to help us with revitalisation work. This is an animation platform we've developed to help anybody, any teacher can use this in a drag and drop environment. Thanks. That's okay. Thank you. We try to make all of our projects scalable and adaptable. So these ones, we develop a number of different projects, like the read-along ebooks, where kids they get it on their iPad or their iPhone, and they can go through. We've templatized a lot of our work, so that when we get a new language group that wants to work with us, we can straight away produce a number of resources for them. This is a new thing we're working on, is a fragile language incubator. We've been working with one language group called Pakwati. These three sisters, Victoria Kennedy, Susan Kennedy and Agnes Mark, their language has been silent for 40 years. These three sisters study with me every week, and soon enough they'll be able to teach their own young people. So they've written a number of illustrated children's books and a bunch of songs that are now being sung in NPA schools. This is the first time the language has been sung again for 4 decades. The songs turned into workbooks, these read-along books as well. In Pakwati, basically, they're showing what can be achieved with the commitment, imagination and strategic support that we provide. There is great anxiety in Cape York Peninsula about the future, and we want to replace the anxiety with optimism. And our vision is very practical. Within 5 years, a young person will have access to a high-quality online course in her language. There will be language experts available to mentor her learning. She'll be encouraged to study towards a career as a language teacher, a linguist or a language nest leader. Her young siblings will know songs and games in their language taught to them by their parents, grandparents and childcare workers. Within 15 years, Cape York Peninsula languages will be examinable subjects in high schools and universities and a required qualification for early childhood workers. Babies will hear their language from birth, so the prosody of their ancestral tongue is a rhythm as natural as the beat of their mother's heart. This is the future that Palmer Language Centre is reaching for, and to achieve it we need good friends and strong ideas. That is all.
Thank you. That was Delilah McGillivray from National Centre of Indigenous Excellence. I really loved your presentation. Just the other gentleman talked about that access to schools, and I'm sort of thinking around your role and whether there were other like youth workers and others involved in your work. How you get that whole community involvement. I mean, I know it takes time, it takes someone to drive that, but that connection to the rest of the community, I'm a bit interested in. Thank you.
So we've found a few vectors to get into the schools. One's the PNC, it's pretty powerful. Particularly at Ingenuity Primary School, the PNC has enough political power to, they've demanded a first language curriculum from pre-prep to grade 6. So it's probably a 5-year project, which cost a little bit of money to develop. We've got a couple of ladies that are looking at starting language nests in early childhood centres and things like that. What other stuff do we have? We do have social workers and things in the community, so they can take these things into school where they see that it's going to be effective.
Can I start by expressing my recognition and respect to the Yugambeh people of this land and elders, and also to thank the organisers for the invitation. It's a real privilege, especially since we have only just very recently started our project, so mainly we can talk about concept development. Perhaps you might sum up, I was thinking I heard a phrase earlier, language embedded in technology. Perhaps what we're aiming at here is something like technology embedded in language and culture. And our project is Ajamunda. It's in the Anandiliakwa language, it's that bark basket. We are from and representing the Groot Island community. Groot Island is off Arnhem Land in the Gulf of Carpentaria. And the community there, the Aboriginal community, is about 1,500 people strong. The language is very strong, such that children are monolingual first mother tongue speakers. And there's very strong cultural continuity as well across the generations. Our task is involved with creating a collection, management and access system for the amount of the materials that have been collected by our language centres and others over many, many years. And you can see it ranges from manuscripts to scrolls to discs, videos, photos, all kinds of things. So what we aim to do with Ajamunda is to create a collection and access system which is very strongly and principally aimed at the Anandiliakwa community as its audience. We aim for very high usability in terms that are relevant to the community, a matter of research and consultation. We aim for very high participation as well. This is really important because we understand that the knowledge around that collection, around those kind of materials, the things that puts them in context, carries them through to the future, interprets them, is the knowledge that's in the heads of the community members. So we hope that they not only access the collection but also contribute more to it. And finally, protocol is important for us. Now, we understand now that because of the continuity of culture and language in the Anandiliakwa community, there's no clear boundary between language and all kinds of other materials. So there's a story in language, but it's a story about a place, and there's a photograph, and there's a map, and there are people associated with that, and there are biographies, and there are other stories by them, and so on. Of course, that's really good, because the more links there are between materials, the correspondingly more valuable and attractive the collection is. It also highlights protocol matters. Now, I mentioned protocol a couple of times. What does it mean? Well, for us, it means if we are building some kind of system, as we are, we need to understand and deal appropriately with issues of ownership and management. So we've often heard about ownership in some communities, not only on Groot, but it's more complicated than that. Someone might own a story, it might be associated with a family, but there might also be, the storyteller might not be the owner, there might be managers for the story in different roles as well, or different aspects of the story. There are also sensitivities, such as what might be seen by men or women. Of course, the very common case that many of us are familiar with, sensitivities about when people pass away, and hearing and seeing them, and so on. All the familiar issues of privacy. And then perhaps the most interesting one for us at the moment, which is circulation. So we've borrowed that term from the librarians, but what I mean here is that knowledge in the Anandiliakwa community is, it's governed by rules and understandings of who knows what, who you have to go to find out something, who you have to go to find out who you have to go to find out things. So there's a very, very complicated, so there's an outsider like me could never begin to understand, but it's very powerful, it's very nuanced, and it's very present in the community. So our challenges are to somehow authentically deal with that, but yet not to sort of like make some kind of pathological Anandilakwa robot. You know, we've got to understand what should be in the system, but what needs to be still, you know, that people are owning and doing as part of their own choices and so on. And it does mean, as we heard before, perhaps reconsidering some of the assumptions that you get in standard collection management systems, catalogues, that sort of thing. So this is what we've come up with so far, early days. So the first thing is that access has consequences. So, you know, in a standard system, you borrow a book, you access something online, there are no consequences, you just accessed it and that's it, as far as the world is concerned. But it's not like that in the Anandilakwa community because, as I said, there's circulation, it's regulated. You had to go to the right person. You had to have a relationship with that person. You're now in a different relationship through that knowledge with perhaps families, groups, whatever. It really has to be like that if you think about it. I mean, if access didn't have consequences, then an access to some resource would be just a transaction. It would mean the resource is just a commodity, not something that's part of a relationship in this web of knowledge, regulation, distribution, circulation and non-circulation in the community. Where in early days, think about this idea of sanctions before barriers, where understanding that the sensitivities are so complicated that normal binary open closed type access management won't work. And so we're thinking of implementing such, the idea that access has consequences actually has two consequences for us. One is that it does mean we can ask, as the system is in our prototype, people, please access the things that you know you should, and not the things that you know you shouldn't. And also, if possible, that people could provide information about that kind of thing to the system while they do it, if they're willing to do that, rather than computer says no. The other outcome from that approach is that as the system is built and as it is used, then it has more and more collection of information, of knowledge about who knows what in the community and about this circulation matter. So that if successful, I'd like to be here in a few years talking about that the collection will become something like a living map of the knowledge circulation in the community. I suppose because the knowledge about the circulation, the regulation of knowledge is as important as the knowledge itself. So there's a couple of strategies we've got started using to help, but we still have a lot of work to do. Firstly, as much as possible, navigation in Anandilakwa buttons and so on, but also in audio, because that's the way it fits in with the literacies and skills and ways that people are currently using technology. Using images as possible, so you can see a little snapshot there of something we're just doing as a sort of mock-up consultation on people getting access to the system, not by having to have passwords and accounts and all that sort of stuff, but by clicking on a picture of themselves. Location-based access, for example, localised wireless networks from outstations, and pre-enrolment, which is something that we can do on Groot because it's such a compact community living more or less on an island, so we can help people to get involved, send around teams, training, that kind of thing. So finally, just touch on some of the technologies that we've started using or we plan to use. We've already developed a rich documented metadata set based on IRCA, the Indigenous Remote Communications Association, for those of you who know that, but also enriched and modified by consultation with our Anandilakwa colleagues. We've built to test all along, and we've been doing this over a year to learn more about concepts, a prototype, simple Microsoft Access database. And we are building on and working with some people who call a system Mukutu. Some of you may have heard of it. It's been used for collection management here in Australia and also in North America, and it seemed a very good fit with us because it's an Indigenous focused It's open source and ought to be as sustainable as we can possibly achieve. And also they've got a really strong record and attention on protocol matters that I mentioned. So we're planning to deliver Ajumunda in these ways, in various ways. I won't go into that because I'll stop talking. Thank you very much.
My name's Stephen Atkinson, and I'm Bangla, a Bangla man from Port Augusta. But I'm interested, you put a large emphasis on protocol, and I think that is something that we all need to understand. But what I find in the fight to continue or have that survival of language, that longevity of language continue, there seems to be a lax in protocol. Have you found that to be the case in an area where the language is still so strong? Have they relaxed certain protocol to keep the longevity of language alive?
Look, to be honest, I'm not the best person to answer your question. From my experience over about a year or so of being the linguist, I suppose I can say what I've learned about protocol. It's not actually separated from the other things that go on in the community. So, you know, what people talk about as everyday things, like as I had on the slide, oh, you have to go and ask Japani for that, or yeah, I know that song but I can't sing it. You'll have to ask one of those Wurawilla people. It's a kind of like for an outsider like me, or if we're trying to distill something to build a system or a service, I suppose we have to extract it. But I mean, it's actually more everyday life for law and life, I think, for the people involved. I don't know if that answers your question or not. So I mean, it's dynamic. It's not like you could sort of write down these things and put it there.
I only ask that because we've had some issues in doing our dictionary, in writing our dictionary and putting our app together, that there's certain protocols we've had to really tighten up on, and some things that we've relaxed as well, to be able to get that language out and let it be taught and let people understand certain things. So yeah, we've had to really sort of tighten the belt on certain things and relax others.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
and I think that's the case in a lot of reclamations, more so than just the revivals or keeping things going. So.
Yeah. Well, I think they're very different situations, but what's certainly in common is we need to recognise that it's dynamic and it's all about negotiation.
I have one question, a curly one. Mining has been present in Root Island for a considerable amount of time. How much money has the mining industry contributed to the revival of language, and were they approached?
My salary's paid. The money comes from mining royalties. Yeah. So our language centre. Well, I should shout out to the ILA people. Thank you very much. Ajumunda is funded, as you might have seen from the beginning, significantly or mostly funded under a generous ILA grant. But other than that, we are funded, as I understand, mostly under the Anandiyakwa Land Council and which is a result of royalties. They go up and down. I haven't been there that long. I'm not really involved in budget type matters. I suppose one of the, if we were to be a bit negative, I suppose, language is so much around on Groot Island. Of course, in the social sphere of the Aboriginal community, it's not in the public space we heard about earlier. There's a big lack of that, and that's a risk for the language, but it's so much around. I don't think there is enough sort of explicit support for language as such. It is largely taken for granted. More could be done.
Yep, I think so. Any other questions?
I suppose it's just a comment and I guess going to the question asked over here around those protocols, and I guess I believe, as an Aboriginal person, that there's some conversations in community around us and how much, on one hand we want to get out there and we want the wider, wider community to, we want a language strategy, and we want our languages out there, and but there's a balance, and I think that in community we're making decisions about how much access to that, and then we want or we're prepared to give. And I guess from an IT perspective, it's and I'll ask the question, is that access in terms of restrictions? I know in other forums we talked about the restrictions to the access to certain information. And I saw in your slide around, so you don't have to worry about all that access. I can poke my face. But again, behind that is those things about how much of our information, our intellectual property, are we prepared to give up for the public realm or for us?
That's a fantastic question. So firstly, it's predominantly, and what I've talked, the scope of my talk this morning was about community access. We will need to have a different way of regulating non-community, outside world, linguists and so on. So I didn't talk to that. It is very important, as you say, to protect. But so we are still assuming that materials which are sufficient, that we have a committee and materials that are sufficiently sensitive, secret, sacred, restricted, for whatever reasons, wouldn't be available. But the point is that the protocols that community members use in order to find out where to get information, what information to look at, what information to avoid, are immensely complex, and they're not ones that we can codify, and certainly not by some binary thing. And you've given me a chance to mention that it's kind of where some of this sparked off from the idea there's an actual cupboard in our arts centre, or cupboards, where there are men's things and there are women's things. And those cupboards are fairly accessible, but they're not locked, and people go along and access things, and they go to the cupboard where they should go, because the men know you don't go to the women's cupboard, and the women know you don't go to the men's cupboard. So you've kind of got a trade-off between either doing something really, really simplistic or appealing to this idea of sanctions, like what choices will people make which are like the choices they make in everyday life. And that's what we're going to do. That's what we're going to learn from. I mean, it may be, there may still be some things we need to learn. I'm sure there are.
So we'd like to acknowledge the Yugambeh people whose country we stand on today. Today we're going to show you our distance-based language lessons using virtual classroom connectivity for Year 8 students at Tenham Sands State High School. Okay, so the program we use is Adobe Connect. The program has multi-hosts, multi-sites, multi-cameras and multi-whiteboards. We are able to interact with the students verbally and via written form. You can have individual or group participation. So it is quite interactive within the classrooms. The kids have access to those whiteboards. We're able to put questions up and things like that. It also records and stores student attendance and response questions, and all lessons can be stored digitally for revitalisation. Revision, sorry.
Okay. Cultural protocol, of course. Our language centre, we cover about 13 languages, different languages that we're actually working with. So we have to be quite aware of the cultural protocols. Our policy is to teach the language of the land, and always ensure that we're working with our elders reference group, which they come in to help us revitalise the language. The school that we're talking about at Tenham Sands, it's on Tuluwa country, but Tuluwa is one of our endangered languages and not quite ready to teach. The other thing is we then had to seek permission from the neighbouring language, which was Gurang, and get permission from both of those language groups to be able to put the Gurang language in the school. Did you turn that thing out? Just like two old ladies here. The school and Education Queensland have a responsibility for this to work. First of all, they had to engage the parent permission for the students in the class. The education department's permission to use the Adobe Connect in the school system. And the classroom and digital equipment has to be available. That includes laptops for the kids, speakers and hearing things, you know. Internet connection, and because it's we're in another site, a teacher must be in the classroom at all times.
Okay, so our role in the Language Centre, for the past 2 years we've focused on how programs and how we could get classes and language taught in the actual school. So it's leading up to this pilot program that's run in the Tenham Sands School. It's taken us approximately 2 years to get all the programs together and the framework. So we have our framework, which is from prep to year 12. It's developed specifically for the CQ region and in line with the national ACARA curriculum. Our resources productions are developed using a template method so it can be easily duplicated for each language.
Okay. The school contacted us and said, oh, look, we want to put Indigenous languages in the schools this year, 2018. So they offered us 3 days a week and 70-minute sessions, each 70-minute sessions. Yeah, so that works out, over 2 hours or something like that per week. So most lessons are usually only 40 minutes, so we were quite thrilled to be able to have that much time with them. How it works, we've got to prepare the lesson using PowerPoint, and then we load it up onto this Adobe Connect. We have to then send the URL. You all know what that is, because I don't. We're going to send the URL to the school, to the teacher, and then she distributed it to the classroom, ready for the classes. We also have to send it a day earlier so they can print off the resources that we use. The lesson can be run by the Language Centre anywhere, as long as we have internet access. So normally we would have a lesson today on Friday with them, and if need be, we could do it from the motel room upstairs to the centre up in Gladstone. But they're at the swimming carnival today, so we don't have to do it. This is a summary of our the 10-week program that we've got for the term. So with wonderful Des Crump, he's here. I'm sure you all know him. Is our lifesaver, and he's put this all together for us. And this is how we teach it. We have all the topics. You've got your language awareness, you've got your grammar, then you've got your practicing. Each lesson has a practice session where we talk and write and read language, and then the cultural knowledge, which has to be part of all of our lessons. So lesson 1 down to lesson 10. That's the program for the term, and then we haven't got the other one, but that's okay. And now these are just photos of the classroom. This is the initial training.
So in this picture it just shows we had to train the kids in regards to the program and how to use it. So that's just an example of the kids logging into the program. So this is a display of Caitlin, our other worker, she couldn't be here due to sorry business, so she's up there and she runs our language lessons in the classroom.
Down the side there.
You'll see down the side it's got, so you have, there's 3 areas. So you have your lobby, that's where we, when the kids are logging in, there could be questions and information in regards to what they're learning and things like that. And so they can do that while we're waiting for everybody to log in. And then you have your classroom.
And then at the end, you have
And then your end one is your analyse, is it?
the analysis
Analysis,
of
there
the
you go.
session. Okay? And that there says, Galangan Yuranam Bangal, Nanunda New. So each lesson we say, good day everyone. My name is Melinda. Welcome to your Gurang language classes. This is the other one I put in place. Then we show them what they're going to do for the day, lesson 3, okay? And there we have it broken down into the sessions for the day. And this
is the
our
actual
screen.
view of the classroom. So, what's that, your left-hand side? Over on your left-hand side
Right.
is your presenters area. So the children don't actually see that, and that's where you store all your documents and
Resources.
your resources of what you're going to do in that lesson. The kids, when they're looking at it, can only see this side of the book.
Where the little boy is.
So you have your meeting engagement. What that actually tells you, it gives you all your how engaged or when you're losing. So it's in real time. So if the kids are sort of dropping off, that'll drop down. It'll tell you you're losing that engagement with them. So
She's talking to the children about different ways of communication. And one of the things, she said, well, what about smoke signals? That was the one way. And then we got permission to show the black comedy video about, sign language. Murray's talking in sign language. What's his name? Stephen Oliver's. And he's on one side of the street and his mate and his girlfriend's over the other side. And I don't know, I'm sure people have seen it. But it was a perfect example of showing the children how you don't really need to be speaking to each other. And that's the sort of part of like the cultural side of things for to show the kids that's part of, how we behave. Pretty much all we have there and what our benefits are.
the ability to teach language to numerous remote communities and schools simultaneously.
Yep.
Streamline different languages for each community. Expand our outreach language learning base. Opportunities to develop pathways for our students through language knowledge. And cost effective in the delivery of our services for the Central Queensland language region. Any questions?
Thank you. That means thank you as well.
Arnie and Stacey, when you put up that curriculum or the outline for the lessons, one thing and you were talking previously about protocols between the two different groups, and you had language engineering up there on that lesson plan.
Yep.
So was there protocols drawn up between the two groups with regards to, because of that group didn't have much language, and did you use Gurang language?
We only used the Gurang language, and the Gurang language is at a stage where we actually do, we have been working on language engineering. We've had to make days of the week, months of the year, time, counting, all of that. The eldest reference group does that. We don't. We just work with them and put suggestions there for them. So they all know that Gurang is the neighbouring, the kids know that Gurang is the neighbouring clan, and that Tulua is the language of the land. And it's so important, particularly in that Central Queensland area where we've had quite a few issues about whose country is whose. We all know that. But yeah, And that's how come we've had to say the Language Centre would teach the language of the land. And that goes for all of our communities out west as well. So I think in Woorabinda, when we went into Woorabinda, they were teaching Gungabulla, Gungabulla, I think. And what we were saying is somebody said, oh, that's really not the language here on which the community is on. It was Wajingu or Wadja language. So we're now working with the Wadja language group to get that up and running, so then it can be taught in the school, and along with the other language too, but making people understand that this is the language of the land. And it's important too when you're doing like a community, because there's so many people have lived there and their children being born there, so but they are from another area.
One quick one, Linda from Slido. Is each student getting 3 times 70-minute language lessons per week, or are they two separate groups?
No, they're one year 8 class.
1 year 8 class
for the whole term.
Yeah.
No other question. I think that's come to our time.
Just one more. Damien Williams from Crump Radio, Australians. Just wanted to ask, how if so, can that be sort of adapted to other languages as well, the program?
Anybody can use it,
Yeah.
any language. We're hoping that this is just a pilot for us, and we're hoping that we will be able to load up all 13 of our languages and beam it out to the communities. And I suppose what will happen is it'll make us more of a technical sort of language centre rather than, paper and that. So, yeah, we'll be communicating via this Adobe Connect.
So it can just be shared throughout?
Anybody can, yes. Anybody. So, yeah, we can
As long as you've got access to the URL, so that's what we email out, yep.
yeah. And if you want it to be a thing, we can send you the URL and you can be part of our classroom.
I'm Rita Katoni, I'm Manager of Indigenous Community Television, and I'm here presenting with Kiara Bailey, who works for ICTV as well and was the director on a project we're going to talk about today. Before we talk about the project, I just thought it might be good to talk to everybody here a little bit about ICTV, because if you don't live in a remote part of Australia or Alice Springs, Broome or Roebourne, you've probably never heard of ICTV. So we're a television station, an Indigenous television station, and we go out via satellite via the VARS platform to almost every remote community in Australia. And the orange area is where we go to, and the yellow is the towns where we are available. We are available 18 hours a day. Our content, 90% of our content comes from remote communities. Anyhow, 90% of our content comes from remote communities, from organisations. There's a lot of organisations, agencies that we work with here today. There was a bit more information there about ICTV. Hank, back? No, okay, let's talk about this. If you don't live in a remote community, you can always get ICTV content from ICTV Play, which is our video streaming site. We broadcast in many languages. We're a very small team. We're based out of Alice Springs. There's 6 people who work for us, and we're principally funded by ILA, from Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet. You just saw our video streaming site, and now I'm going to hand over to Kiara. And we're going to talk about a project that we've been working on for the last 12 months called our Bedtime Stories.
So today I'm here to present a project called Bedtime Stories. Our Bedtime Stories was funded by the Department of Communication and the Arts and the Community Broadcasting Foundation. In the last 6 to 12 months, we have produced 20 videos in 8 different languages, Indigenous languages, in partnership with language centres, remote Indigenous media organisations, arts centres and organisations. This project has also created partnerships between RIMOs and language centres. Our Bedtime Stories is a multi-regional project coming from Central Australia, Nunkanjara lands, Arnhem lands, and the Pilbara. This project allows us to, This project allows us to employ and engage storytellers, translators, linguists, and artists. Our Bedtime Stories exemplifies the advantages in partnership. Here we show the language centres, RIMOs, and art centres and organisations we worked with.
Great. Thanks. That will be programmed on ICTV at 7 o'clock every night, and that will start in March. As you can see, it ticks lots of boxes in terms of remote school attendance, getting kids to school, as well as the work that we've done with language centres and language here. And just to emphasise that we couldn't have done this without our partnership with language centres. We really appreciate how important they are. Plus also the remote media organisations, the art centres in remote communities. So, and that was produced from Maningrida to the Pilbara, Tea Tree, and the Nunkanjara lands as well. And I have to say there was one partner didn't work with a language centre or linguists, and they struggled a lot more to do the translations than the other stories where we had strong connections with language centres. So it's certainly a message I'm telling those remote media organisations is that they have to develop those partnerships with language centres, because we, for one, really appreciate how important those relationships are. And we might just finish off with a video about what ICTV does as well. Yesterday was, the Mother Language Day, and we did 18 hours of programming in language. For NAIDOC week last year, we did 7 days of programming only in Indigenous languages. So we might just finish off with that last little video. Okay, so just in terms of coming up, we aim to maintain at least 50% of language programming. We'll be developing a language portal on our ICTV Play website. And part of that will also be doing outreach to communities and community organisations who are very underrepresented in terms of our library of 4,000 plus videos, in particular in that language. And in the long term, we would like to introduce same language subtitling. So with, for example, the Christabel Swan video, you might have the option of actually seeing that in English or in Patam. We'd like to produce long-form cultural and language programming. That's a project called Stories from Country and Place, and that would be incorporating drone footage and 2 to 3 hour videos of different places. We would like there to be a dedicated pool of funding for language programming on ICTV. And over time, we would obviously like to increase the amount of language content and the amount of languages we're broadcasting in, and to archive our content. So that's it for me and Kiara. Did you want to add anything? No. Okay, thank you.